Hi everyone, and welcome to the Friday, October 22nd installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman of NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson, our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, Scott, this is, it's fall when you have more stories than you have time for.
Right.
Things are waking up again. The atmospheric river is flowing over Silicon Valley.
We're getting rain, finally.
It missed Sunnyvale completely, but apparently everybody else got a lot of rain.
You'll get your time. You'll get your rain.
I'm sure we will. Okay, so let's start out with Bitcoin ETF. They started trading on Wall Street.
Yeah.
So what does this give Bitcoin?
It gives it a little more credibility. I mean, virtually any news that's not terribly negative about Bitcoin seems to give it credibility and jack up the price. We've seen now an ETF, a way to trade Bitcoin.
So this is a mutual investment fund for Bitcoin.
It's a fund, right, for Bitcoin. And now it itself, that fund, is trading on Wall Street. So, okay, a little bit more public ownership, a little bit more public, visibility.
Sure.
And that seems to bring credibility to Bitcoin.
Okay, so is that credibility, you think, the cause of Bitcoin currently now again at its historic high?
I do.
Okay, so do you sense, last time it did that, boom, it collapsed.
Right.
Do you see that coming? I've seen a few commenters out there, experts saying, yeah, maybe it's peaked again and it's going to drop.
Even an ETF doesn't mean enough credibility where this is anything still but a very speculative investment.
Yeah.
Bitcoin, again, as we've said, started life as a currency and has now become a very, very speculative, sexy investment. And that's dangerous.
This is like a war to get packs of cigarettes. So every time we talk about Bitcoin, we go, of course, this is a very risky investment.
Right, because I feel as someone...
It can financially kill you.
Yeah, well, I feel as someone who's been covering this for a long time and who gets asked by a lot of young people, hey, can I buy Bitcoin? Should I be buying Bitcoin? And, the easiest answer is no, it's very risky. And especially right now, at anything at all-time highs is risky.
Okay, well, you've been covering it for longer than anybody, just about. Do you feel more comfortable about it? You're announcing, this makes it seem a little more legitimate and all that, but in your own personal mind, do you still feel that it's too risky for somebody like you and I?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think it's two questions. Am I more comfortable with it? I am. I think Bitcoin is here to stay.
Well, we're accustomed to it.
Right, crypto is going to stay. We'll still have the various, sundry coins coming to life and falling away and all that, but I think Bitcoin and largely cryptocurrencies, the blockchain, these are here to stay. But as an investment, you've seen it yourself. Within weeks, we see moves of thousands of dollars, sometimes $10,000 up and down. And that's really nothing for the faint of heart, nor is that really an investment that you want to say, investment with a capital I, something that I can base my future retirement on, or save for a house or for a college fund. And people are doing that. There are now ETFs where you can store your money and have Bitcoin, but really you need to track the price so frequently, as opposed to, say, a regular mutual fund of stocks, that it becomes just such a blood pressure raiser, it seems.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to spend every day checking this thing.
Right.
In absolute terror every time I open up, turn on my computer. So, is this still really a playground for really rich people that have disposable money that they can put into really high-risk ventures, and people under 25 years old?
Right.
If you're 45 years old and you got a mortgage and, Billy and Sissy both need braces, this is probably not the kind of thing you want to get into, right?
Yeah, someone who's pretty much in that wheelhouse right now and buying braces. I would say correct. Like any investment, I would say make sure it's money you can afford to lose, because you just don't know.
Because you probably will.
But with this, it's extra speculative and extra dangerous because, again, you just don't know, because we haven't figured out what Bitcoin is worth to society, because it's not used as a currency. Right now, it's used as a kind of crazy investment vehicle, and that's extra risky.
Except in El Salvador.
Where they're giving it a shot, yes.
Okay, Apple had an event. How was it?
It was smaller than usual. It's still virtual, and even more perhaps than the other events that have
You know,
been
they're
virtual.
putting 90,000 people in the Auburn football stadium.
I know.
Uh,
I know.
why isn't Apple having its
And they're
normal
filling movie
events?
theaters and
Yeah.
concerts are happening. I guess Apple's just being extra careful. And as much as I enjoy the events, and you and I have talked about this through the
Yeah.
years, I enjoy these events as much as anything
as
else.
a spectacle, yeah.
I see journalists that I've made friends with from China, from the Middle East, from Europe, and it's always exciting to see them at these Apple events because Apple draws from all over the world.
Yeah.
And that's a fun atmosphere. And what you lack from these virtual events, as anyone who's done a Zoom for the last 19, 20 months knows, is atmosphere. And that's why an event like this really comes away with, all right, they updated the MacBook Pro. You got some new earpods. And there's just not much else to say because there was no atmosphere. There was no electricity. You know, they didn't bring out a band at the end.
Yeah, I mean, you always think of Steve coming out on stage at that last moment.
Right. And even with even post Steve, just the idea, the electricity of this is live.
Yeah.
We've seen things go wrong because they can go wrong. We've also seen some incredible moments. We've had, demonstrations through incredible sound systems of what it's going to be like to, let's say, play a video game on this or stream music on this. And that gets completely lost when I'm, streaming this through an old laptop.
In your pajamas, yeah.
I mean, and so, yeah, it's you miss the reason that I came to love the Apple events.
Well, I have to admit, I was at the one where Steve returned, where they introduced the iMac, and they had a movie taped underneath your chair. I think it was Jurassic World or one of those, and they didn't tell anybody. So in the middle of it, it was sort of like being on Oprah, where she gives out a car. It was like some actor gets on the stage and says, "Oh, by the way, our new film is underneath your chair," and a scramble inside of Moscone. I mean, that was about as high crazy and fun as I've ever been in Silicon Valley at an event.
Right, you get a little taste of a concert. At one, I remember when they came out with the iPod, Steve Jobs gave out CDs because at the time we were still playing CDs. I mean, it's an exciting vibe, and you just don't get that through a virtual event. So we can say, hey, there's some important MacBooks.
Okay, so how is the MacBook Pro?
I mean, it's fast. It's got some new chipsets in there. You can spend up to $4,000
I was
on
going
a
to say,
laptop.
is it like the iPad Pro, as expensive as hell?
So more than the iPad.
Yeah, so you salivate looking at it, but you're never going to buy it.
It's one of those things where you can either jump into the new thing because you want to jump into the new thing, or you can do what I do with the iPhone releases.
Wait a year and get there.
Yeah, I just go back one and save a bunch of money and say, wow, this camera is even better than. So, but they're out there and they're much faster. The processing speed, the battery life is better, the charging is faster. All of the sort of incremental things that we've seen through the years. And people were waiting for this one also because it's now got a 16-inch screen and that's bigger. It's a device that is really for content creators.
But Apple's not changing the world these days.
I mean, it's kind of running the world these days
It's
when it
running
comes
the
to
world,
hardware.
yeah. No, absolutely. They won.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like they're playing the 2-minute warning game. They're just, playing defense. I don't see anything, earth-shattering. We haven't seen, we got so accustomed to it and we've been expecting it, but it doesn't come.
Yeah, I mean, the bang, 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 three things of changing the music world with the iPod. I mean, that revolutionized and changed everything. Some will say for the worse because of all the streaming.
Yeah, but it created a $1 trillion market.
Right. It just changed everything in music. The laptop world was already there, but certainly the iPhone changed it. And then, the iMac with the idea of, hey, you can have a relatively inexpensive, small computer that's very powerful. And right, the watch didn't really move the world. I think wearables can be a change for the better when it comes to healthcare and information that we get about ourselves. And that's kind of where they're starting to go with the earpods. They say eventually they want to use those as sort of wearable devices, assuming you don't lose them as you walk around. But even then, it's incremental lately, the last several years.
And the several is turning into 10. I have to wonder, the watch was Steve's last project, in a sense. And, he was always famous for looking at a design and going, not enough. It needs to be more. And I wonder if anybody at Apple still does that or has the power to do that, to say, no, we're swinging for the fences on this one. Go back to the lab and come up with something better.
Perhaps.
Or now it's just the bead counters are saying, okay, that'll sell 150,000 units in the first month, so that's what we need.
And that's something that every company does take into account. I mean, you have all these.
Sure.
We're also at an age.
But that gains primacy as companies mature.
Shareholder value and all that, and nobody has more shareholder value in this world than Apple right now.
Right.
But where does that come in the pecking order? Where does innovation come when it comes to pleasing those shareholders and making sure that the sales are where they are by being, in some ways, and you almost hate to use this word with Apple, but safe.
Safe, conservative.
Predictable, yeah.
Okay, the Valley's currently longest running soap opera, and you get to watch it. It's like you get to watch All My Children every morning.
That's right. That's right.
The Elizabeth Holmes trial. How did this week go? As the seasons change, as the pages fly off the calendar.
Well, this week was, much like the Apple event, a bit incremental, although I think it's leading to something that as I watch the people who are savvy to trials, not so much to tech, but to trials, they seem to be starting to sit up in their seats. We've really established, that Elizabeth Holmes knew what was going on and was calling the shots. And that's very important for the prosecution. One of the things that came up a lot, and it came up earlier when we talked about General James Mattis, who had testified earlier, but the idea that Theranos was telling investors, hey, the military is using our boxes.
Yeah.
Very crucial because, that never happened.
Right.
The military tested them but could not get the results back, much like why Safeway eventually dropped the deal. Yeah, if you ever wanted to know what does Safeway and the U.S. military have in common, we figured that out. They don't
test acquisitions.
Right.
Yeah.
So the idea that we may now get to those investors who were told, hey, the military loves us, Safeway loves us, and they were told that, obviously they were lied to. So
is this going to be now cameos by Hall of Fame figures?
That's what we wonder. And the last couple of days, the name Rupert Murdoch has been invoked in court, possibly because he was the largest individual investor in Theranos, but also maybe because he's on his way. Who knows? I mean, he's 90 years old. Could he show up to downtown San Jose to testify?
Okay, now this is starting to get to me because it looks like the median age of investors in Theranos. Now you could say, well, they're old guys. They don't, they want to live forever. They want the best medicine. But on the other hand, it almost looks like she was preying on old men, old successful men who were not technologists. I mean, look at the people coming through. Kissinger, Mattis. You expect Mattis to know a little bit, but not that much. Murdoch.
The late George Shultz.
George Shultz.
Right. They all fit that profile. And older men, older white men in power who have some money and, perhaps just as important, influence.
It kind of makes them look tragic, too. I have to admit.
It does.
George Shultz, I interviewed Shultz, a couple times for TV and all. I thought he was a great man. I mean, he was dignified, he was sincere and all that. And to see guys like that get taken bugs me. And I wonder if it bothers the jury as well.
Well, that obviously I don't know, but you can't miss the pattern here of who she was swaying, not only because they fit that type, but also what they were not. They were not involved in healthcare. They were not involved in biotech or any sort of tech.
Right.
And so the usual sort of check and balance that you want a board of directors to provide was not there. Yeah. These were clearly yes men, and definitely all men, and who were there to be swayed and give money, but not to check and say...
They were letterhead names.
That's a good way of putting it. And even when Mattis was on the stand, the cross-examination seemed all too easy. Did you know what was going on in the lab? No, I wasn't there to know what was going on in the lab. And that really brought home, a pretty big point to some of us.
Yeah, and you get the feeling if he had been 50, Mad Dog Mattis would have been looking at stuff. You get the feeling if at 45, George Shultz had been asked to sit on the board, he'd be asking a lot of questions.
But you know what? Even some of the venture capitalists who are paid well to ask questions, didn't
Do
ask
their
enough
due
questions. I'm
diligence,
thinking
yeah.
of Tim Draper, who famously, defended Holmes until the bitter end and even passed. And I get it; it was exciting potential,
Sure.
but at some point, you're taking investor money on something that, according to the prosecution, does not work, and that's why we're in court.
There's a legendary story that David Packard was asked to sit on the board of a biotech company, and he said, "Okay, when's the first board meeting?" And they gave him a date, and he had some of his people go out and get like 25 books on bioengineering, and he read them all, took notes, and he went into that first board meeting and he started asking questions. And the chairman and the CEO of the company, I think it was Genentech, had to go out to the lab and bring people in to answer Packard's questions. Now, that's the kind of senior, successful person you want to have on the board, but that's a guy that was still young enough to be asking those questions and technologically astute enough to know what to ask.
Well, and good for all. I mean, you're talking about perhaps the biggest Bay Area biotech success story in history.
Yeah.
So good for them for bringing on David Packard. Good for David Packard for being David Packard and doing all that research and scholarship, which clearly we didn't have when it came to Theranos.
What's coming up next week?
It's funny,
You said something big's coming.
The speculation is that we may start to hear from investors. We really haven't. Mattis was there as sort of a board member.
Yeah.
He did invest $85,000 of his own money, but compared to what the Murdochs
Change,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it would be. It seems like we've now set the table for some of those investors to come in and say, "Yeah, I was told this, but it turned out to be that." So we'll see.
Okay, so who do you think it's going to be? Who are the biggest investors in Theranos?
The two biggest, I mean, the Walton family put in the most money, but that's as a group. The biggest individual investor was Murdoch.
Okay.
Definitely. And then you had some Silicon Valley VCs. You had the Tim Draper.
I want to hear from Draper.
Yeah.
Because
he was the one that was willing to go on the
known.
record as the ship was sinking, saying, "No, I still believe in this."
Yeah.
And so he'll make a very interesting witness if indeed he's called, because not only was he a big investor, but also a big cheerleader for the company, again, until the bitter end.
I wonder if they'll ask him what damage it did to Draper Jervison.
It's hard to say. It's very hard to say, because were any of these investors damaged? Because again, the culture of investment and tech is, hey, sometimes you swing and miss.
Well,
and
yeah,
then you
it
move
didn't
on.
wreck any funds, but you'd have to have second thoughts of putting money into a fund, backed by a company that made this dumb a decision.
Well, and I have a feeling that's why most of the VCs are not talking right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hearing from them saying, I don't want to talk about
Yeah,
this.
because you got to go out and build that next fund.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Heard from Grove. He's asking about the phone war. He's saying, is the phone war, is it really a phone war, or is it a chip and software war? And if it's a chip war, we have a lot of chip problems right now. We have supply chain problems. We have a lack of fab. We have Taiwan. Who comes out ahead on this? I mean, Apple has an advantage because they have an integrated ecosystem. I mean, they're making their own chips now, but they're doing it through foundries, which are also vulnerable. I mean, Google seems to be staying away from that kind of vertical integration, but does that leave them behind because they're going to be last on the list of shipments for chips? And where's Qualcomm? Are they? He says he thinks the clear loser is Qualcomm in this war.
Well, this is interesting, because if you're talking about a phone war, I wouldn't say it's Google versus Apple. I would still say you have to be broader than that and say Android versus Apple. And
Yeah.
the big flag bearer for Android is not Google, it's Samsung.
Right.
They make the best Android phones. They make the best selling Android phones. And really, I mean, I'm impressed every time a new Samsung phone comes out.
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of the fold-up kind of stuff. But
Well, I mean, they take risks.
right, they take
I mean,
risks.
they occasionally set them on fire, but
Well, yeah. But they have a lot of money and obviously a great research team and great products. And Samsung phones are terrific phones.
Yeah.
And that's what I always recommend when
And
someone
they're-
says, I want an Android.
and that part of them is a Valley company.
Right. But hey, Google owns Android. And so every time you buy an Android phone, cha-ching for Google. I mean,
Right.
there are few things we do in this life that doesn't cha-ching for Google, right?
But if you think about it, if you think of the phone business as being a component business, and we're having trouble with certain components right now, who has the advantage?
Well, Apple does because it's building its own chips.
Yeah, where's it building them?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Far away, I assume.
Yeah, or are they making them in Taiwan? I mean,
Well, there are foundries where
are they
build the
using
yeah.
TSMC like everybody else?
They might, and at some point we're going to hear, I assume, if this chip. But look, the chip shortage is the headline. But if you
Right.
read far enough, Apple is not only cranking out devices, but they're shipping on time. Samsung came out with new phones a couple weeks ago. They're shipping on time. Google, the day after Apple, came out with new phones with chips, shipping on time.
Right.
Tesla shipped a record number of cars yesterday. We got their earning report on time. So we keep hearing bad news from, let's say, Ford,
Yeah.
but everybody else seems to be getting the chips they need, at least for now. And that leaves me to wonder just what you asked. Where are all these chips coming from?
Well, you don't necessarily have a supply chain problem in semiconductors because you can put a year's production on a rented 747 and fly it. It's not like you have quarter panels for F-150s and that sort of thing and Wonder Bread, by the tens of millions of loaves. So that may not be strictly speaking, a problem, but I am worried about production. And the car companies, are they last on the list? I mean, when you're shipping the next round of production from your fab, is the top of the list Apple and then Ford's down there at number 52?
Maybe so, and maybe that's why it's doing it, or maybe Ford is just going to a different place for its chips. I mean, Apple famously had a deal with Intel for a long time, then they decided to do it on their own, which given the current chip climate would seem risky. I mean, Intel is a sure bet for making chips if there is one, but Apple seems to be doing just fine.
But they're not flying Chinese jets over Albuquerque. That's why Intel, is in pretty good shape. They are flying Chinese fighter planes over TSMC.
Yeah, so I don't know. A phone war, it's still, I think, Android versus Apple, and so far it hasn't been knocked for a loop by the chip shortage, or else we'd all be waiting for our iPhone 13 or our new Samsung phones.
Okay, so while you're sitting in a courtroom, are you following all this Facebook stuff?
Yeah. Sometimes we have breaks in the case, and I'll hop online and think this company still can't get out of its own way.
Well, now they seem to be going on the counter offensive.
Yeah.
As you see, I saw a commercial. I just caught it, the last couple of seconds of it. But they're running commercials now, advertisements, and they're sober. There's two women talking. There's one where some executive from the company says, we really should be looking harder at what is it, 230?
Right, Section 230.
Yeah, Section 230, which it seems to be like they're shifting it all onto that. We need to retain that, and we need to have some kind of instruction on what we need to do. I mean, it's a weird kind of passive aggressiveness in the marketplace,
Well,
in their promotion.
Facebook is on a PR offensive.
Yeah.
And this we've seen when industries, the thing that Facebook gets, I think, wrongly compared to, but compared to a lot, is smoking, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people do it. We know it's bad for us. We're not going to stop, And remember, back in the, 70s or 80s, the cigarette industry went on the offensive, and all of a sudden you saw these beautiful people smoking.
Yes.
And I remember as a kid growing up, like, oh, so
cool.
If I smoke, will I look like that, really good-looking person? And
it makes me look better.
Yeah. Quickly found out, no, it's not going to make me look better or whatever. But with Facebook, it's I don't know. I get the idea of stressing the positives. Hey, we're a social world. You want to be connected to your friends. But the negatives are what are making the headlines. And for them to come out and say, we're really frustrated.
Their VP of Communications comes out and says, there's more than 30 journalists combing through all this leaked material.
Yeah, 30 plus journalists. And that plus is doing a lot of work in that sentence.
A lot of work.
Trust me on that. And again, to say, hey, you're focusing on the bad. Well, yeah, because of January 6th, because of the 2016 election. Right. And that's what, as journalists, we do. And so
But did they really think that saying, a bunch of journalists are looking into these documents, did they expect the general public to go, oh, poor Facebook? You know, my reaction was, where the hell were those journalists the last 10 years?
But I mean, those journalists were there the last 10 years. Anyone who tells me, oh, Facebook's bad, hasn't been paying attention to anything.
Yeah.
So the work has been done. The news is out there, and I get it. Facebook needs to be on the offensive, but not in attacking journalists. I mean, that's an old trope. I get it, whatever. But they need to not attack journalists. They need to attack the bad news by fixing it.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't need journalists.
They don't seem to have any intention of fixing this stuff. You know,
it makes a lot of money.
I'm not seeing any of this. Oh, we've decided that, this was wrong. No, they're saying we decided to hold off wrecking the minds of teenage girls for 6 months.
Well,
we'll be back.
The teenagers are right. The 10 to
the 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
No, for the teenage cutters, and the 9-year-olds. But they're not saying we're never going to do this.
Right.
We're just going to lay low and come back.
It's a tough position to be in because, again, a wide open platform leads to everybody being on that platform, and that's the problem. But it just seems weak to say, oh my gosh, Facebook is in the crosshairs of journalists.
Yeah.
Clutching the pearls. I mean, you're in the crosshairs of journalists
Innocent
for a reason.
victims.
Right. And again, it's taking what, President Trump used to say, oh, the journalists are unfairly targeting me. Well, come on, Facebook, do better than that.
Yeah.
Fix the problem so that every time I'm on Facebook, I'm not seeing something false about the vaccine or about politics or something like that. It's, I'm on social media for news, and I don't want my news to be demonstratively false. I want it to be informative.
So you think this campaign's going to work? You think anyone's buying it?
It would be hugely and almost wonderfully ironic for those, especially on the conservative side, to say, let's back up Facebook because you're right. The media is targeting them unfairly. Let's all go on Facebook.
That would be ironic.
And this is on the very same week that Donald Trump has launched a social network.
Social network, yes.
And we'll see where that goes. But, look, the social network world is very interesting and changing, and it's up to the press to cover that. And the more you cover it, let's be honest, the more bad news you find, especially with Facebook these days.
And they're under the microscope, and they're going to be under for a while now.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill Gates. We've now learned that he got warned by a whole bunch of people while he was at Microsoft to stop flirting with employees. This is a personal opinion, but I'm amazed by how many billionaires are socially inept. You've been around a bunch of them, so have I. Why would a guy that's the richest man in the world feel the need to bug secretaries at the office? It's not like you can't just walk out on the street and say, I'm available, and have, beautiful, sophisticated women from all around the world emailing him to get together.
I mean, this is someone, more comfortable behind a keyboard than out on the street.
Well,
so that's how it works. Right. And it's really too bad that this is coming out because, again, he was in charge. He ran the company. He shouldn't have been inappropriate.
Well, this is kind of like droit de seigneur, I get my choice of the serfs,
Well, if you're looking at your employees as serfs, then there's a problem to begin with,
yes,
right? Yes,
exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, yeah. Okay. It's a weird, sad story. His spokesman says just recycled false rumors, the usual anti-PR campaign, but it's sad. I mean, here's a guy now trying to go out there and save the world, and everybody's looking at him and going, oh yeah, and you're a skirt chaser. Well, how reliable are you? How much trust can we put in, your big social engineering plans? Okay, finally. Oh, by the way, Grove commenting on it said, Jeff Bezos got accused by Congress of lying. Have you seen that?
Oh, with the search results thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Grove wrote...
That's sort of dogged Amazon for a long time.
Yeah. Well, Grove wrote Jeff Bezos may need to go back into space to get away from this one.
Well, this is a way that Amazon maybe made an executive change at a good time.
Yeah.
Because these things are going to come out, and it's someone, with anti-jazz. You can
Interesting.
say
It's
a new
nice.
Amazon.
That's why I put them together, Bezos and Gates. It's time to move the rich founder out because he's becoming troublesome.
Hey, we are in a world as of WeWork is public, Michael.
Yeah.
So talk about moving the founder out and moving forward. I never thought we'd see that day, but WeWork is a publicly traded company. That's all you need to know about a crazy founder being moved away and a company somehow continuing on.
Right.
So there you go.
And finally, a shout out to one of our listeners from the other side of the world, Amy Schultz. She's a former LinkedIn employee and is now the global head of talent acquisition at Canva, which is a graphics company in Melbourne, Australia. So hi, Amy. It's nice to have a listener antipodian from where we sit today. That's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Have a great weekend. Stay dry. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.